Today, I'm going to pick up where I left last week. I spent some good amount of time laying out the the demographics, the social need, and the ferment in the psychological community that led to an exploration of the possibility of shifting where professional education took place out of the graduate departments of psychology in the country and into what would become professional schools of psychology who would do professional training. And that I had wound up in charge of opening a campus of the California School of Professional Psychology here in Los Angeles, with another campus to be opened in San Francisco under somebody else's leadership. And I took my audience who listened to that presentation up until all the planning that went on, how we turned a dream into the edge of reality, and that we held registration on a day in September. And I left everybody in turmoil with my presentation because I said we had held a registration and an advisement meeting with the incoming students we had selected on a Sunday in September. It was to be followed by a party at one of our faculty members' houses where we would all celebrate this historic moment. But when I opened the door of the room where the students were waiting to go through registration and advisement, I saw two incoming students seated on the floor just across from where the door opened. And one of them announced to me, his name was Albert Gibbs. He announced to me that the students were on strike and they weren't going to register. And without even having a school yet and without even starting the school, the students were already on strike, and everybody in the room was nodding their heads in agreement and said they weren't prepared to register either. I forgot the name, unfortunately, after all these years, of the second student, but I remember Albert Gibbs very well. I was thrown aback. What the hell was I going to do? I was looking forward to being able to rest a little bit more after we got up and running, but here was a crisis before we ever opened. So I started, it was, I think, the first time I started to do something I've done more often later on, and sometimes in work with clients. I just said to them, look, I will fix what you're concerned about. What is the problem? And I trusted myself to come up with some kind of solution. And somehow, if I heard the problem, I would come up with a solution. I'd find at least one, maybe more solutions. So what I started hearing was that the the incoming students were taken aback. All the school's literature, all the materials that had been forwarded to them, all the articles they had read about what we were trying to do in our existence showed a commitment to honoring diversity. And as Al Gibbs, who was Black himself, said, we saw who the faculty members were who went in to work with you today. And we see you, and we saw the registrar, and we saw the librarian, and all of you are white people. Where are the Black people? You've been lying to us. What are you going to do about this problem? Why didn't you do something up until now? Why are we about to go to school in a place where everybody in leadership roles is white? So I said, I'll tell you this. We reached out to the Black Psychologists Association and we asked them to help us in the planning and to identify personnel that we could call upon to be part of the teaching cadre and even the administrators who would come. There is a very bad relationship going on right now between the Black Psychologists Association and the American Psychological Association. And we were seen as part of the establishment, and they would have nothing to do with us. They are boycotting us too. So we got no help. we tried making phone calls to several people we know in the community who are black and asking them if they would break ranks with their national association and come and help out, and we got turned down. I said, but I will solve the problem. And they said, well, what's the solution? I said, well, I haven't worked out all the details yet. I was lying. I didn't know what the goddamn truth was that I would be able to tell them. I said, would you do the following for me? Would you just come and register and let's go to the party? It's scheduled for 2 hours after we adjourn. That will give me some time to finish my preparations, and I will talk to you about what I believe the solution is. And we'll do this in good faith. If you don't want to continue after you hear my presentation, then that'll be fine. We'll refund you your money and you will not register. Any one of you who's unhappy after that can decide not to proceed with being a student in the institution. So I went home and I was with my wise, dear wife, Hermine, the third person I had an affair with, who I had subsequently given me the courage to break up my marriage and get married. But that's a whole other story. I'm not going to. Wonderful that day. She said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. And she said, am I invited to the party too? And I said, yeah, spouses are invited. She said, let's talk on the way there. You think in the car while we go, and you'll come up with something. And I'll tell you what I think about what you're doing. I know you'll find your way through this. It was really wonderful to get her love and support. So in the car, I remembered something came to me. I remembered a sociology course I had taken as an undergraduate. And we studied community organization, among other things. It was a big, hot thing that was happening in the field of sociology. And there was a sociologist, a community organizer named Saul Alinsky, whose work was being very much talked about, and he was very esteemed. And so we read some of his papers in that class, and one of them particularly struck me a lot. It was about how, if from within you are running into parts of your organization that are unhappy and really demonstrating and throwing crap at you, the way to move forward is not to oppose them or to fight with what they're doing, but to invite them into the power structure to participate and to say that their problem is very well worth working on. So I decided that's what I was going to do when I got to the party. And when we got there and everybody had assembled, I said, here's my solution. I turned to Al Gibbs, I turned to the other guy, and he said, here's what we're going to do. I am going to set up a committee on achieving diversity for the Los Angeles campus. You two guys are going to be co-chairs of that committee. I'd like you to find a third student who's willing to join with you. And I will pick 3 faculty members who are interested as I am in trying to move this campus towards diversity. So you'll have a 6-person committee, but you two guys will be the co-chairs. I'll be your consultant. I'll come as often as I can if I'm not busy with other things, and I'll brainstorm with you. And I'm going to give you 1/4 of the school's budget for this coming year. We are going to be able to start the building of our endowment fund because all of us are working without pay. We have only a very few paid employees. You're going to pay us tuition, and that's going to go into the beginning of the building of an endowment fund and give us some kind of cushion under us so we can persuade the State Department of Education that we're not living on the verge of bankruptcy all the time. But I will take 1/4 of that amount. It's probably going to be about $25,000 to $30,000, and I'll give you that as a resource. You can spend that money in whatever way you guys come up with to expand the diversity on the campus. And if you don't like what's happening, I'm putting you in charge of helping us to find a solution to what's happening. They were very taken aback. They hadn't expected that at all. It turned out to be a very creative solution. Everybody agreed to proceed, and the committee was established. I gave them the money, And 7 years later, the campus got an award for being a model of diversity in the teaching of graduate school, graduate psychology. So we did very, very well. I dodged the bullet and moved on. And I have other stories to tell about telling somebody I had a solution to a problem with having no solution to it whatsoever, and how I found what to come up with. But I will let that go for the time. I will have lots to say about my life as campus dean on that campus in subsequent presentations. Uh, what I did want to talk about was the other topic I had brought up, that I had managed to extricate myself from my marriage, and I had married somebody else, finally. It was not easy. For in the entire year after my second marriage had come, my second love affair had come apart so painfully and so crazily, I didn't want that life anymore. I had no desire to start a third affair. I was going to hunker down and be with my family, no matter how pain that was, until the last child was 18. I would somehow find a way to survive, and that way was not going to include having a mistress. That was not a good solution. I had really hated being, that's not fair. I had been so ambivalent about being an adulterer. Much of what I experienced was calming, was sweet, was supportive, was nourishing, but much of what I experienced was the ugliness of duplicity, lying, hiding, being unreal, carrying on a charade at home. Uh, I don't like living in with terrible secrets and with part of my life in darkness. It's not a good life. So I came to the conclusion that I was not ever going to try that solution ever, ever, ever again. I would just be miserable and manage my misery. So if you remember, the person I had my second affair with had been a colleague who was sharing spaces with us and renting space and being a staff member in the Western Psychological Center. And she left because her husband demanded, as any reasonable husband would, that she couldn't continue to be employed in the setting where her lover had been. So gone she was, and we had an empty office. So the process of trying to fill the office started. And we weren't just renting offices. We always wanted to live like a family. And even though people were in independent practice, we wanted to have weekly faculty meetings. We wanted to have weekly staff meetings. We wanted to be friendly with each other. We wanted to be a kind and accepting work group, all of us working side by side. So we just didn't see if somebody had the financial wherewithal to sign a lease and pay for it. We were inviting people into our midst. So we had an interviewing process. We would meet with them like Supreme Court justices do. Each one of us who were partners would spend a little bit of time with them, and then we would invite them to a staff meeting, and we would ask them to comment on cases. We would hear more about what they're interested in and what they've done with their lives until then, and we would have a group interview with them. So one day, about 2 months after we started this process, and we didn't really like anybody who'd shown up until then, the woman who was destined to become my wife showed up. She knew one of our other colleagues who was part of the group. And at that time, she was an educational therapist, and she was working mainly at home, but her educational therapy practice had picked up, and she decided that she wanted to have a professional office where the kids came to, and or she was going to make more house visits too. She thought would be good to work with some of them in their own home setting. So she needed at least a part-time, but maybe a full-time office. And she was coming to ask us if we would, even though she wasn't a psychologist, we would be willing and interested in having her be a member of the group. Her husband was an attorney, and they were very close friends with one of our existing staff members who was renting space from us. who had recommended her, and we liked that staff member and trusted her judgment. She had said this would be a good addition, and she would be helpful too, because if we had kids with learning problems, she would give us suggestions about their management, and there could be a kind of reciprocal referral going on. We would refer cases of learning difficulties to her, and she of course could refer the kids of hers who had emotional problems to one or another of us, as saw fit. It seemed like a good synergy. Now, the thing I didn't say anything to anybody about was I was smitten with her at the occasion of having my first 15, 20-minute conversation with her. I found her quite lovely, and I started to have daydreams about having an affair with them that I had to murder. And the thing that made me not want to take her on was I was afraid I would surrender to temptation and I would go down that path again, seeing if she was available to have an affair. And I had to grit my teeth and say, I'm not going to do that. I'm not even going to comment on whether we should hire her. I'll say I'll go along with the will of the group. And if the will of the group is to bring her into association with us and give her the office, I would make sure I avoided her. So at her group interview, I was really rotten to her. I was sarcastic. I asked her impossible, unpleasant questions. I was just obnoxious. I didn't want her to be drawn to me. And I was like a porcupine sticking quills in her so she would have no desire to have much to do with me if she came. She told me later, when we had developed a relationship with each other, that she was working part-time doing educational therapy at the Thalen's Clinic at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and she had an appointment with her boss, who was the chief psychiatrist, and she she went in and said, "I've just had the most horrible experience with a psychologist I've ever had in my life." He said, "What's the psychologist's name?" And she said, "His name is Arthur Kovacs." He said, "That's funny. He has a very good reputation. He's supposed to be a very kind and intelligent man. I don't know what happened between the two of you." Well, what happened between the two of us was I was trying to wreck any possibility we would be together from the first moment I was being involved with her. And for the better part of a year after that, I would turn away when I saw her in the hall. I would say something sarcastic to her in passing. I was never kind or decent or nice with her. And I'm ashamed of myself in retrospect. But all of that turned on a dime. Uh, First of all, I had, again, one of the more horrible experiences of my life with my former wife. Over that period of time, my mother, when I was being rotten to my oncoming wife, my mother had come down with ovarian cancer, and I was now in another source of horrible distress in addition to the distress that I had interacting with my wife. My two sisters came when my mother first collapsed. They stayed until they heard the diagnosis, and then they left again. One of them lived in Hawaii and one of them lived in Florida, and they never again came to visit over the next 8 months while my mother was dying. She was left entirely to me to manage. As a matter of fact, neither one of them came to her funeral. They plaintively started telling me it was too upsetting. It was too upsetting to see what she was going through. They were like children. So I was the youngest kid, and I was stuck with the responsibility for her, which I tried to acquit with as much goodness and dignity as I could. My having kept the client that I told you about, I read the story that's going into my book, having kept him company while he died, helped me. It helped prepare me for what I would have to go through with my own mother. So my mother died, and I felt a sense of liberation. We had the funeral. Liberation because she too was in such terrible pain towards the end. And we had the funeral, and I was crying my eyes out, but I was crying for my father who had died when I was 12. I wasn't crying for my mother at all. My mother was at peace. Somehow we had worked out a rapprochement while she was dying. She took my hand once and said to me, "I didn't think you cared about me. And I thought my daughters would be around when I got into serious trouble, and you're the only one here. And you come every day for at least a few minutes." And I said, "I did care about you. And as soon as you were in serious trouble, I had to change my priorities and make more time to be with you. I had too many other things to do, and I did neglect you over the last years when I returned to live in California. But I'm here now, and I will be here as long as you need me to be." And I would bring her grandchildren to visit with her. My former wife had no interest in seeing her at all. She never came. That was one of my additional grievances I had. She too was pulling the same stuff. My aunt died of cancer. I can't stand it. I can't stand hospitals. I can't stand to be around dying people. She once told me, she gave me a gift. I came home and was crying in our bedroom after I had left my mother to come home. And she walked in and said, "Are you crying?" I said, "Yes, I've just been to see my mother again, and she's getting much worse." And she said, "I can't stand a man who cries," and walked out on me. That was another gift I got from my former wife. Well, my wife was coming about 4 days after my mother died. And she said, you've had a hard time for many months now. What would you like to do for your birthday?" And I said, I know you hate the wilderness. I would really like to take a trip into the wilderness because I'm always soothed and I feel better when I'm out in nature. And that would be a really nice thing to do. And she said, "Well, I'm not going to go backpacking with you, and we have children." So I said, "All right, I have an idea. What if we rented a camper? There's a place in the Sierra I've never visited. There is a car road in. It's Mineral King. It's called. There is a car road in, and there the meadow's up at about 9,000 feet. It's supposed to look very much like the Swiss Alps. There's a huge meadow. There's a river running through it, and there are glaciers all around on the mountain peaks. And you can do day hiking. You don't have to backpack. And if we had a camper, we could take the kids with us. There are beds for them. There are beds for us to sleep in too. And there's a kitchen, and there'll be a bathroom. And we would have our own little motel. There's a campgrounds there, and I could call the the National Park Service and see if there's still spaces available and reserve a space for us. Would you do that?" So she agreed. And as a matter of fact, some friends of ours thought that was a wonderful idea, and they would come with their kids too. So there were going to be two families who went to that space. And I was happy and looking forward to it. I rented a brand new camper. There's a place on Sepulveda Boulevard in Van Nuys, close to the freeway there in the valley. And they rent all kinds of RV equipment. So I got a very nice camper, a large camper on a Chevrolet truck base. It had only 6 miles on it. It was brand new and still smelled like a new car. So we were going to leave about 3 o'clock in the afternoon and get to Mineral King, go up the mountain road about sundown or even a little later, and uh, rest for the evening there. And we would try and keep in touch with the other car. We try and stay in visual range of each other and drive rather slowly but carefully so we could keep the two cars together. There were no cell phones back then. So I went up. I was leading, and they were following me, and I could see them in the big truck rearview mirrors. And I kept my eye on them as we were driving. I went up the grade in the Grapevine and started down the other side, and we were heading towards Gorman, and suddenly my temperature gauge started going up on the truck. Up, 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 up. It was going to start boiling soon, and since I knew about cars, fortunately, because I worked in car repair, light car repair when I was in high school and early in college. I knew there's one thing I could do. I wanted just to make it the last few miles to Gorman so I could get, I thought a fan belt must have broke, although I didn't know why on a car with 6 miles a fan belt would break. Everything else seemed to be working okay. Oh, the air conditioning stopped. That was proof to me the fan belt had probably broken. I just wanted to limp along somehow and get there. And I had been taught there's a mechanic's trick about what to do when a car is overheating, and that is turn the heater on, because the heater is connected to its own little radiator that a fan is blowing across it to dissipate the heat. And while where you're sitting will get hot and uncomfortable, you are slowing down the overheating of the car. So I turned the heat on, told everybody, my kids and my wife, open as many windows as you can. And we were just miserably hot because it was summertime and we were hot. And I did manage to, I finally was able to even to turn the engine off because it was downhill going all the rest of the way to, I could see a gas station in the distance. And I made my way into the gas station. And since it had been such a hot day, there were many stranded vehicles waiting for the personnel of the gas station and little repair facility to work on. And we had to wait. We had to wait our turn. And the guy said, some of the problems are complicated. I might not be able to get to this until the early hours of the evening. You'll just have to wait here. And my former wife went ballistic. I knew I shouldn't have come on this. You always get me into the biggest trouble. What's the matter with you? Can't we leave? Can't we go somewhere else? The mechanic said, well, there's a motel you can walk to from here. I'm not going to go stay in some strange motel. I want to get this car moving again. This is a disaster. It's going to be a disaster constantly. And I have the children to take care of. So I had offered the guy if he'd let me work alongside him on some of I'm handy on some of the things that were ahead of me. I would speed up the process, and I was starting to do that. And every half hour, my wife was said, I can't stand this. You got to do something. We can't stay here like this. It's too hot in here. The kids are cranky, and I'm stuck all alone having to take care of them. You're not available. You're useless. I sent the other car on ahead to try and get to the campground in time, because if we didn't claim the place where we would be camping, it would be given away to people on a waiting list. And I was worried that would happen. So they went on without us. And I'm still trying to get my truck fixed here. And eventually the guy said, look, you do know what you're doing. I will turn my back. Here, take whatever tools you need and get to work on the truck and see if you can get yourself out of here. Your wife's really very unhappy and being very unpleasant. So I started to work on the truck, and yes, the fan belt was broken. And I said, do you have another fan belt? And that under the hood was complicated. I had to unbolt and move the compressor for the air conditioner in order to get the fan belt open and available. So I did that. And I pulled out the torn fan belt. I showed it to him. He said, what's the year of this car? I said, it's this year's model, the truck. He looked, he said, yeah, I have a fan belt. Here's a fan belt. Stick it on. So I stuck the fan belt on, and then I pushed the air conditioning compressor back in place. I bolted it tight. I made sure the fan belt was looped around the air conditioning thing too. I fired up the car. It was running. The temperature started to run down, to come down on the truck. And then I took one last look, and I saw why the fan belt had broken. The pulley on the water pump was out of round. It was a damaged pulley that had been installed at the factory. And if I left that fan belt running for many miles, it would tear again and break. But well, now I would be stuck somewhere else. And I said, no, I'm going to need a water pump, or at least a water pump pulley if they're not an integrated unit. And this this truck won't run properly without that. Can I get a water pump? And he said, no, I don't have any water pump for that. I said, well, where can I get a water pump? He said, what time is it now? It's early evening. He said, my supplier is closed. I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to call Bakersfield in the morning and call my parts supplier and have it sent up by on the next bus that goes through here, or get somebody to drive it up here. And you're not going to get a water pump before 10 or 11 in the morning tomorrow. So I apologized to my wife and I said, there's no water pump. There's not going to be any relief until 10 or 11 in the morning. Maybe we should go to a motel. And again, she started screaming at me like a banshee that I was a terrible person. I had gotten her into hell, and she hoped I suffer. And maybe we should go to the motel. She couldn't go on this way. And then I remembered when I had been taking tools and looking through this repair bay outside the back door, there were some old cars and trucks that had been abandoned. I guess they were being cannibalized for parts. And I went out there and I saw there was an abandoned truck that was about 6 or 7 years older than the model I was driving that was sitting out there. So I asked the guy if I could have the key to open it so I could pop the hood, which I did. And it looked to my eye like the water pump was the same as still Chevy was still using the same water pump 6 or 7 years later as it had on that model. And I told him that, and I said, I think the pump might fit. I don't care how old it is. Let me take it off and see if I can put it on this truck. And I could, and it fit. And I told my wife, there's only one bad thing. I think we might get rolling soon. I'll know in another 10 or 15 minutes. But there's no air conditioner pulley in addition to the water pump pulley. And we're going to have to drive a camper that has no air conditioning. And she said, no, we're going home. And I said, are the other couples waiting for us? And I said, I still want to go. We will keep the windows open. Maybe the temperature won't be so bad. When we get up to higher elevations on the mountain, it certainly won't be as hot there. And she said, God damn it, you always have your way, and agreed that I could drive the camper to the mountain, which I did. And it ran fine, and it didn't leak, and it didn't overheat. When I got there, I found to my horror that the other party had not arrived in time, and we couldn't have the assigned spaces that were given to us. So I just camped along the river as best I could. It was about 3 in the morning then. We found a space beside the river and we parked and we went to sleep for the night. In the morning, one of the park rangers was walking and inspecting things, and he saw where we were parked, and he said, I'm sorry, you can't park here. Oh, this was Labor Day weekend. That's right, we were going to have a long weekend in the place. You can't park here. Uh, the, those are not legitimate parking spaces, and we don't allow anybody except in marked campsites. So you're going to have to leave. And I said, is there any place close by we could go to? There are other campsites. And he said, no, the nearest place that the Forest Service has a campground located in is over on the other side of the Sierra. You'd have to take a road over the Sierra crest and come down on the east side instead of the west side. And there is a campground located, I forgot what town it was near. And the other party was up for it. We figured we'd get there for probably in the early evening again, and maybe we would have a day and a half or so of comfort in the wilderness if we moved to the other location, which we proceeded to do. With again my wife protesting and saying all she wanted to do was go home, and we were being cruel and inhuman to her and to my kids. We arrived at the new place, and it was a horror. Most of the forest on 3 sides of it had been clear cut. There were nothing but stumps there. The stream that ran through it was full of mud that had washed down from the hillside because there was no ground cover anymore. The trees had been removed. The water was not fit for drinking. We didn't have that much water that we brought with us. It was ugly in the place, and the sun was beating down. It was hot as hell because most of the trees that used to surround the campsite were gone. There was hardly anybody camping there. Everybody else found it not a place to their liking. So grudgingly, I said, "There's nothing to do except get out of here. This is just horrible." And I was upset and not paying careful attention. And when I backed up the camper out of its assigned parking place, I banged it and dented in part of the camper shell. And um, I had a car accident. And off we went to get home. And when we got home, the kids were kids, and the inside of the camper was filthy. There was drop food. There was mess. There was dirt. I knew I had to clean up the camper, and my former wife said to me as soon as we got home, "This was your idea. I'm not going to help you with a camper. I'm going to take the kids in the house, and I'll see you after you've gotten the camper and returned it to to where you're renting it from. Then you can come back in the house." So I fixed the camper up as best I could. I drove back to Van Nuys. I turned it in. I got into an argument with the guy who owned the place. I said I had been screwed because there had been a defective part. I needed him to know there was a jury part put in that got me moving again, but he needed to replace the water pump and the pulley for the air conditioner. And I was sorry that I'd caused a dent in the shell of the camper, but he had made me miserable and ruined my trip, and had caused me heartache and expense getting his damn thing moving again. I was prepared to call it a wash and not sue him for what I had lived through, and we agreed to separate. And both of us would live with our misery, and I drove home. That helped me find the resolve. I had had enough finally. Uh, I just needed to figure out where I was going to go. I started in secret looking for an apartment without telling my former wife. I found an apartment and I rented it. And then I said, I am going to tell the truth to Hermine. I'm going to tell her I've been rotten all this time because I had not wanted to have a love affair again. And I certainly didn't want to have a love affair again if I hadn't separated from my former wife. And I was going to be doing that when I got a place to stay in. So I waited for the right time. I found an apartment finally. I put a deposit on it and got the keys. And I was sick that day. Things seem to happen when I'm sick for some reason. I had a very bad cold and a slight fever, and I waited for her, and I wrote her a haiku. Broken leaves touch on winter's first sigh. Two dart and are gone. Two dart and are gone. I think that was the haiku I left for her. And I put it in her mailbox at the center. And I told the secretary, please tell Hermine I left a message for her and she should be sure and check her mail. Oh, the rest of the message was, I need to talk to you. Would you stop by my office at 4 o'clock? I'm free then and I want to talk to you. And I thought her curiosity would get the best of her. And I had heard rumblings, which I'll tell you about in a moment, that I was likely to get a good reception. And I waited. I got a note back from her. Oh, and I saw the receptionist at my break. The receptionist said, she can't come to your office at 4 o'clock, but she's free at 5. Will you wait until 5 o'clock? And I did. The rumblings I had been hearing over the few months was that she had had a conversation with Dan Golden, my partner and my best friend at that time. And she said she was having trouble, that I had been rotten to her, and obviously I had no interest in her, but she didn't know why. She felt a growing interest in me. She thought I was quite intelligent. To everybody else, I seemed like a kind person, just like her boss had said. I made very good comments at the staff meeting. She had been impressed with my capabilities as a psychologist, but she didn't understand why I wouldn't talk to her and why I continued to be irritable with her. She had been very cunning. She told Dan, oh, and she had sworn Dan to secrecy. He was not supposed to say a word to me about this. But cunningly, she knew he would immediately tell me, and she hoped that that might make a difference. Well, he told me, and I just gritted more. It seemed like she was acting like she would be receptive if I made some move towards her, but I wasn't going to do it. But that gave me additional courage when I was finally ready to do it. And she did show up, and she said, "What do you want?" I apologized to her for how terrible I had been treating her. That's what I wanted to say to her, and to say I was actually very attracted to her, and I was trying not. I told her I'd had two previous affairs before I had seen her, and I didn't want to do that anymore. So I've been trying to resolve the temptation in me and trying to signal to her over and over again that I was not available to her and I would not participate with her. She said I had done a very good job, and she meant what she had said to Dan Golden. She was interested in being with me, and she said, I'm still married, but she said, I guess we're going to start an affair. I don't know anything about affairs. And I said with great cynicism, I'm afraid I know too much about affairs. So I said, look, I don't want to get sexual with you. That just intensifies the bond between the two of us. I'm willing to spend time with you, even though you're married. I'm willing to have conversations with you about what it would be like putting our lives together. But I need to spend significant time with you, at least 12 times before I'm willing to be sexual with you, because I'm very much like a woman. If I get sexual with somebody, it really intensifies the bond between the two of us. And if I lose them, or if I separate from them, the feeling of loss is 1,000 times worse than if I'm having trivial sex. And she kind of smiled. She found that interesting, and so we started. And after 12 times, we did become lovers. And long before even we became lovers sexually, she kicked her husband out. He put the last straw nail in her coffin too. The biggest problem she had with him, he was totally irresponsible financially. He was the scion of a very, very wealthy lawyer. He had gone into his father's law firm after he had finished law school, and his father had had to fire him because he was so irresponsible. So he'd gone into practice on his own, and he was constantly in financial trouble. He would forget to bill clients. Uh, he would forget to file on time. He was frightened of malpractice suits against him all the time. He didn't pay the bills. He forgot to pay bills when he had money. And one day her car had been repossessed, and that had been horrible. Suddenly, he had not made the payments, and his car was gone when she had to go somewhere and pick the kids up from school. And she had to figure out some solution to that. On another occasion, the water had been turned off in the house they lived in because he hadn't paid the water bill. And she had to live without water until she could figure out how to get some money from somewhere and get the water turned back on. So on this occasion, that was the final straw for her. He had called her from the office and said, I'm coming home at such and such a time. She said, please stop at the market on the way home and please pick up some toilet paper. We're down to the last roll in the bathroom and it's almost gone. And he said, I'm sorry, I'm tapped out. I don't even have enough money in my pocket to buy toilet paper with today. You'll just have to use newspaper. And that did it. she said, "You're not coming home. I've had enough. You're irresponsible. I have to go back to work full time somehow and arrange for some kind of child care for the kids. I am not going to depend on you anymore because you're worthless and not dependable. And I'm going to take charge of my entire life and the life of the children. Go back to your parents' house or find someplace to start spending your nights because you're not welcome here anymore." And off we went, and we got married. We got married about a year after we started being with each other. And we were married at the time the school opened because we got married in 1971. The thing that made me so happy, among other things, that I was marrying her is fate is really funny. That 3 days after I finally got the courage to tell my wife that I was leaving, and to tell the kids that I was leaving, I was going to start living somewhere else. That was gut wrenching. I told them I'd bring them over to see where I was living within a few days. I went off and I promptly proceeded to get sick. I got chicken pox as an adult, and that is a horrible disease for an adult. It is relatively trivial for many young people, but in adulthood, it usually is very severe. I started running temperatures that would spike up to 105. I had horrible sores scattered over most of my body. I had sores in my esophagus that would hurt every time I tried to eat. I had sores inside my mouth, and I called my wife to be and telling her that my temperature is going out of whack, and she said, I'm coming right over." And she parked her children with friends and came to be with me. And she said, "I'm going to call your doctor right now, and I'm going to get him on the line and find out what you need and what I should do." And she talked to him over the phone. He wrote a prescription. He said, "You stay here. I'm going to go pick up the prescription." And he gave you a very limited diet. You can eat sherbet, and you can have ice cream, and you can help things that hurt. Eat things that don't irritate. Maybe mashed potato. You can have some mashed potato. I'm going to supervise you. I'm going to give you warm baths with Epsom salts in it. Those will soothe you, and you can sit in the bath and they'll help your hurts on your body. And I said, "I will stay here till you're able to take care of yourself." And that just seemed awesome to me. My God, she had two little girls to take care of, and she was prepared to push them to one side for several days just to be my nurse in residence with me. She didn't go to work either. She was just with me for 24 hours a day, watching over me. And she even invented a very, very creative thing. I said she must be a good witch, I told her. What she did was I had to name the larger ones of my scabs where some healing was taking place. I had to name them as traumas I had in my life. This was this disappointment, that was that cruelty, whatever it was. The biggest one on my chest I called my father's death. And she said, as each one of these scabs fall off, the amount of pain you have from having gone through that and thinking about that every once in a while will lessen mightily. That's why you got sick. You got sick to heal the pains of your life, and the healing from this illness will do significant goodness in healing the pains of your life. I thought that was incredibly creative. And I wanted to go into willing suspension of disbelief and believe everything she told me was absolutely true, and I would be better off after each of those scabs fell off. And I must say, the last one to come was the biggest one, the death of my father. And I did feel more at peace with that after that scab finally resolved and fell off my skin. So I think that's all I will say about my coming together with my wife on this occasion. Uh, I want to talk then, if I have a few minutes left. I started a little late. No, I'll just go on record about what I want to talk about. I've neglected telling the stories of some of my early clients. So I think that's where I'll stop next time. I will pick up with two particular clients that I remember well. I haven't even written the stories of either of them yet for my book, but they are with me today when I think about what the earlier years were like, and I will talk about that next time. So thank you, anybody who's been watching or listening to this, and I will be back again in a week. Okay, you guys, I assume, have unmuted yourselves, so I'm open for any kind of comments about the madness of my life.
I have just one question about your situation with your first wife. How did the your children, react to your leaving your first wife?
They cried bitterly. They didn't want me to do that. They started crying when I left, and I started crying as soon as I went out the door. And oh, God, I went to my lonely apartment by myself and cried some more. And for a while, she said she wasn't gonna let them come with me to see my apartment because she didn't know if she approved of where I was living, and she would have to approve of that. I knew I was going to have a troublesome divorce because she would have to approve of where I was taking them before she would let me do that. And we had a horrible fight about that. She didn't get to decide where I was going to live or get to put her seal of approval on it. I had a right to have my children come see where I live. So after that, every time I went into the house, they were like the deer in the headlights. They knew there was trouble between the two of us as well as the loss of me, and they and not try not to react to anything. They wanted to be aloof. They wanted to be out of it. That was a hard thing to work on.
Way to bring us down, Scott. That's kind of a downer. I'm just,
Oh, you have to revisit the time when you separated from your wife too.
Exactly. Definitely, I can definitely relate to that moment as being maybe one of the, definitely probably the hardest of my life. So.
Yes.
And
Glad to provide you the service.
yeah, yeah. No, I just had an observation on maybe you're the luckiest person in the world because I remember spending a whole day putting my water pump on and off of my 65 Chevy 3 times because every time it wouldn't quite meet up. There was a warp somewhere,
Oh
and there you
yes.
are finding this random water pump that seems to mate up and doesn't leak. Doesn't happen.
Yeah. Oh, and I was using, well, the gasket had only been on there for 6 miles worth of driving, so I figured the old gasket didn't seem torn or broken in any way.
Ah,
The one that was on the new car, so I could attach this and hope that the gasket wouldn't leak water too, and it didn't. It didn't leak, and the old
miracle.
pump
That's
ran fine.
yeah. And then the other question is, and this is another silly one, but that's me. Um, how come 12?
I don't know. Oh, but
10, you have six
that's
toes?
what I'm going to be teaching over and over again. When I'm at some kind of choice point and not sure how to proceed, I just wait and see what boils up from my inner region somewhere and comes to my attention. So the number 12 came, and so that's the one I muttered.
Okay. I was worried maybe you had six toes and you rather than 10, you went with 12. I don't know. I wasn't quite sure.
So, oh, I will come back to one last thing and close up a knot a little bit. After we had that wonderful turnaround at the party, I didn't mention that we were still living partly in the 60s. Everybody was smoking pot at that party, and about 2/3 of the people there got naked and went into the pool skinny dipping. I didn't think that was seemly for the dean to do, so I resisted the temptation to join them, even though I did have a little bit of marijuana. And I had such a warm feeling. On the way back, I said to my new wife, you know what? All the preparation was an agony. All the getting ready for this was problem solving, being up at night trying to figure what the solution to this, that, and the other thing is. But look, everything's in place. There's a campus, There are classrooms, there are students, there are people getting ready to teach. And starting tomorrow, it will get so easy after that. That was the stupidest remark I have ever made in my life. The next 7 years of my deanship were full of turmoil, grief, hurt, upset, difficulty, complex problems, and that will be another story I have to tell too.
I think
So,
CSPP wasn't as exciting by the time I got there. There was hardly any skinny dipping.
well, we moved away from the 1960s as a culture. The Vietnam War ended and more traditional life resumed again.
I think I caught some of the end of that in the 70s.
Good. All right, guys. I'll be with you again next week.
Okay. All right.
Bye.
Be well.
Good to see you guys. Bye.
All right. Take care.